I remember back in the 1980s when the movie Platoon come out around the same time that Full Metal Jacket come out, maybe a year or two apart. But I remember kids in school were, or at least boys in school at the time, was all about the sergeant on Full Metal Jacket. They all had these lines down pat, or Tom Berenger's lines in Platoon. They'd shout them at each other in the hallways and stuff like that. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but at the time it came out, I mean, as a little kid, I mean, I was all into the war movie type thing. There was several Vietnam movies like that around that time period, and a lot of people knew them all by heart and everything. But I remember bringing it up to my father at one point, and I said, if you was to ever watch one of those, could you tell me how accurate it is for what happened, over there? And he kind of said, look, I'm not really interested in seeing something like that. And I don't remember exactly how the discussion went, but I do remember at one point he kind of got a little irritated because me, as being a stupid kid, didn't really fully grasp what that would have been like. But he said, look, he said, there was 18 months of my life I was over there, and I didn't even want you or your sisters to know about it. I even wanted to keep that quiet. But I was drafted, I was sent over there, it was a bad time, and I don't want to watch any movies, and I don't want to talk about it. And I really, really would rather you didn't even know about that. It was a really sore subject that I shouldn't have even bothered him about, but I knew it was something. In older age, I can understand a whole lot more than I could being a stupid little kid at the time. But I remember asking him at one point because I said I can imagine not wanting to talk about something bad, and he just kind of cut me off with that one. He wasn't really a strict guy when it comes to discipline. I mean, every so often, like with Vietnam or something like that, you would encounter something and you knew, okay, this is not something you want to push. And he said, God forbid you ever have to go through something bad in your life. He said, hopefully not a fucking war, because if this country ever starts another draft and gets us in another Vietnam, he said, I'm going to break one of your legs to keep you out. And he said, I'll be doing you a favor. And I'd never heard him talk like that, so but he said, if you ever go through something terrible in your life, which I pray you don't, but if you do, you're not going to ever want to talk about it. It's going to be a private, personal matter kind of thing. And, of course, I never went through anything as terrible as a Vietnam War, but I can say that when it comes to talking about jail, or when it comes to talking about being locked up, or when it comes to talking about emergency rooms, or when it comes to talking about my drug court and all of that, it's not something that I really wish to. It's not something I want to talk too much about. I mean, I have no desire to relive what it was like to be incarcerated in those situations. Let's just say it was very, very unpleasant. But it was one thing that stuck out in my mind. I remember we were at some kind of, I don't remember where it was exactly. I know it was some kind of motorcycle event, but as we was leaving the thing, he said, them guys that we walked by that was talking about being in Vietnam, he said, I can pretty much tell you they weren't in Vietnam. And I said, how would you know that? That was kind of a surprise to me, because it was one of the few times he brought it up. And he said, I just know. And I didn't question him about that any further. But when I got to AA, one thing that is funny, I actually felt guilty for doubting the people's stories when I got there, because I was told, all this bullshit about that's my twisted thinking, that's my disease, trying to justify drinking. Like when I heard a story one time, I said, I just don't believe that story is remotely true about a guy that was telling some horseshit tale in a meeting. And they said, well, that's just your sick alcoholic thinking and your disease telling you that. You just don't, you want to go drink is what it really is all about. You're not interested. That's why you're even thinking. That's your fucking ego. I could do an entire video about ego, but for purposes of this video, what I was thinking about was the guy who was talking at the time. He was claiming that he was the youngest man that was ever put on death row in the state. Okay, I don't believe that. And then he was saying, the judge told me that they were going to sentence me to death, and I told the judge, fuck you, you can't do nothing to me now, I'm going to die. I'm like, okay, this this is just bullshit. I mean, I just can't believe this stuff. But over the years, being in AA, it seemed like every single person I met was some kind of imaginary badass in their previous life. If they wasn't a major badass, a major drug dealer, a major criminal, there was, I guess they're getting on up in years now, so they probably is not as many that are telling those kind of stories, but everybody's a Vietnam vet. I remember one guy that was always talking about how he was in the jungle and he was using throwing stars to kill Viet Cong enemies. I'm like, the Army gives you throwing stars? I've never heard of no shit like this, but later on, he was at a speaker meeting and he was talking and he said, I was born in 1957. I thought, so you're not old enough to have been over there using throwing stars against the enemy. I mean, it was just such crap at the time hearing it. But it got me to thinking about how many badass stories I heard that were probably all just completely, totally made up. And I was thinking about the major ones that I saw. There was a subsection of people that were like AA bikers at one point, and they were all members of some 1% motorcycle club. It was funny. One guy got up there to speak, and he said, and I was president of a 5% biker gang. I thought, a 5% biker gang? Well, 5%'s are prison gangs. The motorcycle clubs, and they call themselves clubs, and I'm not a club member. I'm not a prospect, a hang around, a patch, or any of those things, but they call themselves clubs. They don't call themselves gangs. Law enforcement calls them gangs. But he was saying he was a president of the most dangerous motorcycle club in all of the East Coast. And I thought, okay, here we got, well, not here because I'm not living there at the moment, but I said the East Coast is, at least Pennsylvania, Jersey, it was pagans territory. So I just went up to him and asked him, and I think it scared him because he thought I might know somebody in the pagans, because I said, well, who were you with, the pagans? And he's like, well, those kinds of things we don't need to discuss. I mean, I'm not the man I used to be, and I just don't feel like there's no need to. You're the one who said it. You said you was president of the most violent, dangerous club, a gang on earth. So, I mean, how'd you get out of it, by the way? Because literally when it comes to those the 1%er clubs, like the Hells Angels, the Pagans, the Outlaws, those kinds of guys, when you get into those kinds of things, I mean, the only way to get out of those things, there is a way to get out in good standing, as they call it, and there's a way to retire in some cases. Like you got the guy, what's his name? He's kind of famous, Sonny Barger, who's written books and everything. I mean, he's in his 80s, 90s now. I don't think he's doing much the badassery stuff. There are people who are disgraced, but I mean, you literally get your tattoos sliced off and you get your colors taken and you get pretty much a major beating, and you can't go around talking about that kind of thing. And no, I didn't learn this by being in it. I learned it by just reading freaking books, to be honest. And there was 1% presence where I used to hang out and drink. They never bothered me. I didn't talk to them. I mean, I'm not a club member. I'm not trying to be a club member, so why? But they weren't those AA biker assholes that I encountered that walked around in those meetings with their bandanas and their really expensive leather and their chest all puffed out like that, looking like they just wanted to fist fight somebody. I'm like, it's funny, the actual 1% presidents I've encountered, they didn't bother me, but they weren't going around acting like you. You were acting like somebody who's trying to be a tough guy. You're acting like a phony wannabe. You're not acting like a tough guy. But there was, it was almost enough to turn me off on motorcycles in general. I mean, literally, I got to where I hated motorcycles. I got to where I hated these people with their Serenity stickers on the sides of their gas tanks and their leather and their... I remember one guy that actually was in one of those kinds of things. He was out in good standing, but he said half these people in here that are claiming to be AA bikers, I think they turn 35. I think they get a couple of tattoos at an upscale parlor. They buy an expensive Harley Davidson and they just start lying. That's what I think they're doing. So that was one subsection of tough guys I met. There was another subsection of tough guys I met. They had the hat around backwards. They had the chains. They had the tattoos. There was one guy that he had AA tattoos even. I've got tattoos, by the way. I'm not knocking people who got tattoos. I've got tattoos. I've got more than this. But he was one of these, he wanted to be a gangster a little bit too badly, if you know what I mean. He was just, there was a part of me that when he tried to say he did time in jail and all this, just because I've been in jail and stuff, I was listening to it and I thought, but that's not what goes on in jail. You know, like he was telling me he was booked at this one place, and I thought, yeah, I was booked into that same place. That's what you're talking about. Sounds like something out of a Hollywood production, but that's certainly not how it goes when you're booked into that jail. When you're booked into that jail, you sit there for about 10 hours in a holding room with a whole bunch of other guys like you, and then you finally get processed in. It's not what you're talking about. He tried to tell a story one time where he said, in sobriety, things got so bad that I was just self-will run riot. I was out there running the streets, even though I wasn't drinking, even though I wasn't doing drugs. Did you know the 5 families in New York? They wanted to give me a contract. That's how bad it was. I'm like, the 5 fucking families in New York wanted to give you a contract. The 5 fucking families in New York have anywhere from 200 to 300 killers at their disposal at any given moment, just a phone call away. I'm supposed to believe they're going to give a murder contract to some guy with a serenity prayer around his fucking neck? I mean, there was a landlord guy I had. There was the homeless. There's always the people. I was living on the streets when I got here. I was behind a dumpster somewhere with my friend will know the reference, a raccoon. And then here it is. I just quit drinking, and 2 years later, I have a $500,000 home, and I have a top job at a corporate position, and I have millions of dollars in the bank, and it's all because of this program. Anybody that's ever been homeless out there or borderline homeless knows for a fact that it's almost next to impossible to get out of that fucking mess. If it hadn't been for people that helped me along the way, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, you know, I've seen people say homeless people need to go get a job. Well, you can't really get a job without an address. When you try to get an address, the apartment wants, references for the past 7 or 8 years. You can't get a light bill turned on. You can't do a lot of things when you're homeless. You don't just go to a bunch of AA meetings and turn into a fucking millionaire if you were really as bad off homeless as you're claiming you are. But the thing that it killed me how we're supposed to sit there and believe this bullshit when we know these people are lying. We know these people are making these stories up. We know that none of this stuff could possibly be true, but we're supposed to go to these people for advice about how to live our lives, how to be spiritual, how to be honest, and how to quit drinking. It's the same thing that used to kill me about these people that one guy was telling his sponsees about relations and how they didn't know how to have a relationship because they couldn't invite God into the bedroom. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you're a guy who deliberately filed for a phony disability so you'd never have to pay child support. You've never even tried to visit your kids. You even talked about this in meetings. But you're telling me that I don't understand how to have a relationship with another human being. I mean, I had a sponsor that used to say, hey, doesn't make sense. Sick people talking to other sick people and getting well. But nobody's getting well in AA. Nobody's doing anything but providing an audience for these phony badasses to have soapboxes when none of them would last 5 seconds in the real underworld that they're always talking and blabbering about. It's kind of a lighthearted video at 13 some odd minutes, but chime in on the comments and tell me about some AA badasses you met, some major drug dealers, some cartel leaders, some war veterans that were specially trained in operations and all that other kind of shit. It's really funny. Before I go, I had a family member that was a younger family member in the military, and he said, the funny thing about it is 90% of the time when you're in the military, especially if there's no war going on, it's just like being out here in the civilian population. You got forklift drivers, you got truck drivers, you got warehouse workers, you got janitors, you got, you got store clerks, you got inventory specialists, you got guys that work on vehicles that are mechanics, you've got engineers, but every time you meet one of these famous badasses that was in the military, they were always a special ops, Delta Force unit, Green Beret, Airborne, 120th Division, whatever the fuck. Anyway, until next time.